wanted to share with you the best spicy books that I read in 2022. And I say that very particularly because I don't necessarily mean the actual spiciest books that I read this past year, because I actually did read a lot of other books that technically were much spicier than the ones I'm going to be sharing with you today. But I wanted to share with you the best ones, the one that have a good amount of spice. Like, it's not just like a level 2, it's a level 3 or above in a scale rating of 1 to 5 in spice level. And then it also does have a really good romance. So we've got the spice, but we've also got the really amazing banter and tension and angst and everything that I love seeing in a really well built up romance, whatever it is that you want to call it. It's got a good romance, it's got a good amount of spice. Put it all together, it makes it the best spicy books that I read in 2022. So the first book that I wanted to share with you is not only the first book that I read in January of 2022, but it is also the first 5 stars that I gave out this past year. And that book is Voyeur by Fiona Cole. So this is a teacher-student romance. You're following this girl who needed a little bit of extra money for her college tuition. So she ends up getting a job at a sex club, and it happens to be a voyeur sex club. So she basically is just like a waitress there, helping the patrons however she can. But also, any one of these patrons can anonymously request her to do a specific sexual activity of their choosing. And if she says yes, then she's gonna end up going into a room and doing whatever it is that they ask behind a one-way mirror. So these patrons can either be behind the one-way mirror, or they could be in like a back corner of the room where she can't see them. And then it's all anonymous. And basically, one of the patrons that are coming to this club very often start requesting her a couple of times. He starts to get very infatuated with her, and it goes on for a couple of weeks. And then all of a sudden school starts and she walks into her first day of classes, and who do you know is her teacher, the guy that has been coming to this sex club and has been requesting her over and over again. And the thing is that he recognizes who she is, but she does not recognize who he is because of the whole anonymous thing. And the story is more or less gonna go from there. So this book definitely does have a very like spicy feel to it because of the whole voyeurism sex club thing. You do spend a lot of time there, but then you also do have this forbidden teacher-student age gap romance thing going on that adds on to these spicy feelings. And besides for all of that, because it does have a good amount of like, smexy time in it, it also does have a really good romance. I do very specifically remember this guy being a damaged character, and there was a reason why he was going to that sex club that you're slowly going to find out over the course of the book. And I really liked seeing the development there of like how he slowly opened up to her and we started to find out more about him. And it really brought the book down from like just a very spicy whatever book to an actual like realistic one that had a very good romance with build up and tension and angst and a lot more emotional depth to it. So if that does sound like it's something up your alley, I highly recommend checking this book out. This next book, very coincidentally, has a sex club theme going for it as well, and that book is Gimme More by Sarah Case. So this is the third book in her Salacious Players Club companion series, and in this story, you are following 3 different characters. 2 of them happen to be married, and they are both part owner in this kinky sex club that more or less will match you up with people who have very similar sexual interests as you. And then there's this third guy who is more or less their third wheel. They all 3 are best friends, do every single thing together, and he also happens to work for the sex club. I believe he's like the carpenter for them or something like that. But either way, at the beginning of the story, you find out that all 3 of them are currently on a road trip across America, checking out different sex clubs to bring back some new ideas to their own club. And while they're out and about, the guy that happens to be married realizes that he might be turned on by the idea of his best friend getting it on with his wife, and he wants to watch. So he ends up confronting both of them about this and convincing them to try out this new thing that he's interested in. And the story is more or less going to go from there of him trying to figure out why he's interested in this and where he actually wants it to go. And by the end of the book, it is going to be a poly relationship. So all 3 of them will end up in a happily ever after together, just in case that was something that you were interested in. But either way, that is more or less the gist of the story. So this is probably the actual smuttiest book that I am sharing with you in today's video. But I do think that even though it was extremely smutty, it did also have a really good romance and a really good buildup. And what I specifically liked about this book is that usually when you get a very smutty book, I feel like sometimes the sex scenes end up feeling repetitive, and it's just like, okay, like, yeah, this is a lot of smut, but like, I've had enough almost. But in this book, that wasn't the case, because every time we did get one of those scenes, and we did get them a lot, they were always changing up dynamics because this guy had to figure out what he was actually interested in, and therefore they were always trying out new things. And that was a very big part of them building up their relationship. Like, without the sex scenes, the relationship wouldn't have been able to go where it was going to go. So I feel like even though it did have a lot of smut, it did also have a really good like build up and romance and everything along those lines, and those 2 things were woven together really nicely. So if you are into very very smutty books, but you also want a really solid romance as well, I would definitely recommend giving this one a shot if the ideas of it, like the kinks of it, sound like it's something up your alley. Because if you're not into the ideas of this story, it's not going to work for you. But if you can wrap your head around it, I think that you'd have a really good time with this. Next up, I have A Photo Finish by Elsie Silver. So this is the second book in her Gold Rush Ranch companion series. And in this story, you're following this girl who is a jockey for a horse ranch in this small town. So she more or less like races horses for a living. And a couple of years ago, very randomly, she decided to post a nude photo of herself to an online forum. Like she was kind of trying to get out of her comfort zone, do something a little bit different. And that's what she decided to do. And obviously she's going to get a bunch of like random creepy messages. But one of the messages happens to be like a proposition from this guy to like, look, I'll give you this and this amount of money if you send me this and this photo. And she obviously like says no to it. She's like, look, this was like a one-time thing. I'm not really interested in that. But somehow that initial interaction ends up starting a friendship between the two of them. And then over the course of the next year, even though she never really took his offer, they end up becoming friends and talking a lot. And then I forgot the details of what exactly happened to blow up their friendship, but something went on between the two of them. And now they're no longer friends. They no longer like each other. And then I think it's either like a year or two after that blow up of their friendship where they actually bump into each other in real life and realize who each other are. And it is extremely awkward because he happens to be one of the family members of the family that owns the horse ranch that she lives and works at. Like his brother actually like runs the place, but he is like, you know, obviously related to the family. He has like a stake in it, and he's more of like the money man who like lives in the city and does other stuff. But for some reason, he has some business in town for a while, and he is going to be staying on the ranch. And not only that, but they're actually going to have to live in the same house together for a while for stuff that like, you know, you'll find out if you decide to read the book. But either way, more or less, it's a forced proximity situation where they're living in the same house together. And then on top of that, they do have a history and they very much don't get along. And then on top of all of that, he also happens to be a damaged character. There's a reason why he was originally on that online forum. There's a reason why he had originally propositioned her for the things that he had asked her for. And that is definitely going to play a very big role in this story that you're slowly going to find out as you read it. And it's also going to be like a big part of their relationship and everything like that. So basically, it's a really, really good romance. And even though this is probably like the least technical smutty book that I'm sharing with you in today's video, it does have a couple of really good smutty scenes in it. And that is why I decided to add it onto this list, because even though it isn't very heavy on the smut, it does have a very good few smutty moments. And then on top of that, it's got a very good romance going for it. So I just really wanted to recommend you this book. The next book I wanted to share with you is Quarterback Sneak by Candy Steiner. So this is the year that I started reading Candy Steiner's work, and I feel like I have made a good indent in her backlog. And out of all the books that I read by her, which were a handful, I feel like I read like at least 10 or so, this was by far my favorite. It was also the most recent one that I read by her, and it is also her newest release at the time that I'm making this video. But either way, this is a book about a guy who is the captain of his football college team, and he's going to end up having a forbidden romance with his coach's daughter. She's extremely off limits, but he's going to go for it anyway. And this book definitely does have a very classic storyline in that sense of like, if you've read a lot of sports romances, like it just goes down the general trajectory of where those type of books go. But what I feel like was very unique about the story was the way that everything else was built up. Like both of these characters, they had such unique personalities, and the way that like their romance was built up, like the way that they connected with each other, because like both of them were damaged characters. They had a lot of similar things going on in their lives and their past and things along those lines. And just the way that they connected over that, and the way like the chemistry was between the two of them, the way that they even bantered with each other, the tension, everything along those lines, I feel like it was done so freaking perfectly. And I loved the way that they just built up their relationship. And yeah, it did have that classic storyline going for it, but everything else about the story was just so freaking good. And then Candy Steiner does write really good smut, so like it does have a handful of really sexy scenes in it. And all around the board, I just think that this was one of the best spicy books that I read this past year. So if you are a fan of sports romances, I highly recommend giving this one a shot if you haven't read it yet. The next book I wanted to share with you is another sports romance, but this time it is a hockey romance instead of a football romance. And that book is Consider Me by Becca Max. So this is one of those like I was a player until I met you sort of storylines. You're following this guy who's a professional hockey player, and he is very well known for being a player. Like he sleeps around all the time. He's very much not interested in a relationship, and everybody knows that about him. And one day he ends up going to a party and he sees this girl. He tries to make a move, and she ends up turning him down because she's very well aware of who he is, and she is like a relationship type of girl. She's not really interested in like, you know, what he brings to the table. And he really doesn't want to take no for an answer because like no one's ever said no to him. So therefore he is going to try to heavily pursue her and have her like give him a shot. And that is more or less where the story is going to go. So very classic I Was a Player Until I Met You sort of vibes. But what made this book very unique was everything else that actually happened in the story. Like I feel like this was one of those books where you kind of just got to hang out with the characters for a very long period of time. And that is personally some of my favorite type of books to read about. I love seeing many interactions, many conversations, many mundane moments that just build on top of each other to make the romance what it is. Like you really got to see them hang out all the freaking time and see that relationship bloom. And that is, I think, what I really loved about the story. And then on top of that, you also had such good communication between the two of them. And I think that was something that made this book really unique for me because I've never seen two characters really like talk through their issues as well as these two characters did. Like he was obviously coming from a place where he's never been in a relationship before. He doesn't know how to have a girlfriend, and she was very wary of his past, and therefore she had a lot of like, I don't even know how to say it, but like she was very like nervous to get into a relationship with him. And basically they had to talk through that a lot because sometimes like, it would cause a fight or something like that. And it's like they wouldn't let it go. They would really talk through it. And I really loved seeing how well they talked to each other and how often they did anytime something came up. So all around the board, I feel like it was just a really good romance. It built up really well. I'm not saying it was perfect. There were things that I would have changed in this book, but I still absolutely loved it. And then on top of all of that, like relationship wise, it did also have a really good amount of smut. And the last book that I'm going to be sharing with you for today's video is Corrupt by Penelope Douglas. So this is the first book in the Devil's Night Companion series. It's a very popular series, and I actually have read through Kill Switch. I read Hideaway and I read Kill Switch. Never ended up reading the novellas or the last book, and that is mostly because book 2 and book 3 I didn't really enjoy as much as I enjoyed book 1, and therefore I just like kind of stopped reading the series eventually. But if you were planning on reading the series, I will say that I do recommend reading them in order, even though you can technically read them as a standalone. But with that information on the side, I'm only recommending you Corrupt because it is the only one from the series that I've read that I actually enjoyed. Even though if you've been with me for a while, you might remember me saying a little bit of like controversial things towards this book because at the time that I read it, I wasn't sure if I absolutely loved it or absolutely hate it. But now that time has passed, I've decided that I actually really did enjoy it. So that is why I wanted to recommend it to you. So if you are not familiar with this story, you're basically following this girl who a couple of years ago ended up spending Devil's Night with this group of 4 guys who call themselves the Four Horsemen. They're kind of like the troublemakers of the town. They're always getting up to no good. And she ended up tagging along the night before Halloween while they went and did a couple of very illegal stuff. And then the next day, 3 out of the 4 of them did end up getting arrested for the stuff that they had done the night before. And they always blamed this girl because she was the only one with them. And they think that she is the one that told on them. So now it's a couple of years later and they're all getting out of jail. And the one guy that never actually ended up in jail has been planning for the past couple of years on how to get revenge for his friends on this girl. And now that all of his friends are out, they're finally going to start like enacting the revenge. Is that what you call it? I don't really know. But either way, it's more or less a bully romance. And the things that they're going to do to her to basically ruin her life were so next level that is what was making me uncomfortable. I'm like, this is a little bit too much for me. And I don't know if I like this or not. And after the fact, like once it's far away, I'm like, yeah, it was kind of a fun time. Even though in the moment I was like, what the hell is going on? But either way, this is definitely a dark romance. It's got a very like dark, atmospheric, like moody vibe to it. And it's not going to be for everyone. But if you are into like bully, revenge, plot, dark romances of sorts, I would highly recommend giving this book a shot. And I don't even think I told you what the actual romance is about, but the romance is between this girl and then the one guy that never actually went to jail, who happens to be her ex-boyfriend's older brother and also like a family friend of sorts. So there's a lot of like, connections that way, and the romance will kick in. It is more of a slow burn because for the majority of the book, you are dealing with that whole like revenge plot scenario. But once the romance kicks in, oh my God, does it get steamy. And I'm not even saying that pun intended, even though there is a steamy scene in a steam room. So I'm gonna leave it at that. This book is very dark. It's very out there. It is very steamy though, and it is one of the best spicy books that I read this past year. So with that said, that is all of the books that I wanted to share with you for today's video. So I know that it wasn't a lot, but this was more of like a very curated list of books that I read this past year that I think had good romances, but also were very steamy. So if you enjoyed watching this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you are not currently subscribed. And either way, with that said, thank you so much for watching this video because I really do appreciate it. And either way, until next time, enjoy reading.